This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we continue our analysis of Season 5 of The Chosen with a discussion of the second episode, House of Cards.
Okay, yeah, House of Cards. I remember that title. Yep. We keep making our way into Season 5.
I don't have any particular comments to say about this at this point, so I guess we just hit that spoiler horn and get right into it, Marty.
We're all used to it now. We just don't have much to say. We just spoiler horn away.
So we begin again at the Passover table. We have Luke 22 happening here. Still no Judas present at this point. I think they all go backwards. I don't know.
I was going to kind of wait maybe for the next episode to make this point. At this point as we record, I've watched a few more. But they are working backwards through the dinner. And it correlates with the narrative that they're working forwards in the main body of the episode, which is pretty fantastic. I don't know if somebody made an observation. I've had a gazillion people ask me, like, is there a chiasm? Because they're going backwards, but the story goes forwards. Is there something in the text there?
Yeah.
And now it makes sense. I'm like, why is everybody asking me that question? And I hadn't watched enough episodes for that to make sense. But it is very, very clever. Just as a design, it's very, very interesting. I'm stunned at how well it works.
Maggie does not like it.
Took us a few episodes to like, okay, this is what's happening. Yeah, this is what happened. Yeah.
Maybe she'll come around as we get deeper into the season, but at this point, she is not into it.
Yeah.
But the disciples are arguing about dying for Jesus. There's, the talk of sheep scattering, Matthew 26, Mark 14 stuff. It's like Mount of Olives stuff, but Luke 22 comes before that point. So they're struggling to harmonize the text as we all have. And then there's the John 15 portion about greater love has no one than this, but to lay his life down for his friends.
Yeah, I totally appreciate what you're saying about harmonizing the text. I've just appreciated, I don't know if it's a struggle. I just have viewed it as artistic, like they've pulled these passages together. And I really like how it lands most of the time. You've heard my quandaries with the cleansing of the temple and where they put the other statement about weeping over Jerusalem. But most of the time, I just really like how they've woven. What am I trying to say? Maybe they're not trying to harmonize it as much as just choosing to put these passages together for purposes of the episode. And I've really enjoyed that. One of my favorite lines in this section was I have the line where it tells Peter, I've prayed for you. I thought it was interesting. Thomas says he'll die. Did you find that? I thought, oh, well, the people that said they were going to do that, Thomas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I'm here for it. That was a refreshing little bit in that scene. So yeah, that's all I got for that scene, but yeah, good stuff.
And maybe the out of order thing is just a way of being like, well, we can't make everything line up perfectly anyway. So why don't we just do our own creative thing with it?
Yeah. I've been reading a lot of N.T. Wright right now and a lot of just Jesus Quest stuff and Crossan and Borg and N.T. Wright, and everybody's always arguing about where these sayings land and whether or not they're accurate and historically reliable. And one of the things that N.T. Wright says that I completely agree with is he had to have said these things more than once. So it's just super plausible for me to consider like weaving these things together because these were probably a part of his, maybe not these exact sayings that we're looking at, but so much of what Jesus taught. I bet he said some of this stuff 20, 50 times like I do when I go around on meet and greets. I say the same thing every time I go show up somewhere. I bet Jesus said a lot of these things in a lot of different contexts. So works for me. It really does.
And then we are into the credits. So coming out of here, we are flashing back to Ramah and Naomi. That's her mom. She's receiving a gift for her first solo job. Coffney is outside briefing Thomas on the job. Feels like a real mentor, role model sort of situation going on there. Totally different than we've seen in their relationship at this point. And the couple has apparently ordered a 3-year and a 2-year sequence of wines. And Coffney's like, oh, I'm going to send a 15-year wine. to get them started or whatever. And it just is not the Coffney that we know at this point.
Yeah.
A very generous, joyful, like willing to celebrate and like all this stuff. Like not the Coffney we know. And like Coffney and Naomi, like they clearly like Thomas a lot.
Yep.
And they refer to him as the orphan boy at the door or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember I think I wrote that down right.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. But yeah, you're right. Without probably making notes or writing anything down, I did just appreciate the complexity again of character development. And like, yeah, this isn't like good guys and bad guys. It's not like the good guys all believed in Jesus and followed everything. And then the bad guys were just bad guys. And no, here's a generous dude that really is trying to walk what we might call the paths of righteousness well. And based on life circumstances and the way that he sees things and theological nuances and whatever it might be, ends up on a different side of this by the time season 5 rolls around. So, yeah.
So then we have Peter preaching. Andrew's trying to give him some cues. He's doing a piece from Matthew 18, and Andrew's, he's just trying to encourage him. And meanwhile, Z's concerned about the shadowy figure, Jake. I haven't actually found that out yet. Still at this point. And Philip is like, well, only Rome can arrest somebody. So there's like, what can happen? What's possible? Everybody's kind of theorizing about all these things. Then we see this Jake guy walking next to this girl. She veers off, and turns out she's reporting something to Malchus. And Malchus is only mentioned in John 18.
Is that the spy? Is the spy Malchus? Is that who they've named?
No. The spy is Jake.
Oh, the spy is Jake. Got it. Malchus is Malchus. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Roger.
But Malchus is only mentioned in John 18, which was curious to me. I did not realize that it was not in the synoptics that he's named. So something going on there that I'm kind of keeping an eye out for as we get deeper into the season.
Which I love. It makes sense as a history nerd because John is the one that has the priestly connections. It's going to be John that knows the name of the high priest servant. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm in.
So then we're back with Leander, Dion, Fatia. They're asking about the Passover sacrifices. There's discussion about regulations and money changing, all that stuff, sin and atonement, how the practice has been abused. They're trying to interpret Jesus's words about all this stuff. Then they actually arrive at the market and they learn the actual exchange rates. And Leander and Fatia are like, what? Very offended by this. And then it's like, oh, the sacrifice is also only for men. So Leander leaves and, he's just got a bad taste in his mouth about the whole thing. And then there's this comment about like the spices are there to cover up the stench of the blood, but it's not working. And then there's a sign that says, keep out Gentiles. So not the greatest time for them as they learn how this whole thing works.
Man, I just have a slew of notes over this scene. A couple of things that were just historically, I just love that they had the wall. The sign is there. We know about that sign.
Yeah.
All that stuff was great. I couldn't figure out. Well, I also had I love that these are the folks from however many 2 seasons ago, whatever it was, now getting along. They're at the temple. I love that image. But then I couldn't figure out wait, we have Gentiles at the temple trying to celebrate Passover. I was trying to square that with, and I'm not saying that never happened. And maybe there's something about Second Temple Judaism. I mean, The Chosen has me guessing everything about what I know about history.
Right.
Because actually I'll do some digging and I'll be like, okay, sometimes I have no idea where they're getting stuff. And then sometimes I'm just totally wrong about stuff. So I don't even know what to be confident in anymore. But I can't imagine a world where Gentiles are there, A, celebrating Passover on their own, B, engaging in the sacrificial system. I'm not aware of any Gentile that could offer. I'm just so confused about that whole section. But yeah, I was back and forth. I was back and forth. But yes, only men, the wall for the Gentiles. I was a little nervous that this feels a little supersessionistic at points. I'm going to go back and forth throughout this whole season. This feels like we're leaning supersessionistic, and then it'll turn a corner. I'll be like, okay, I'm on board. I like this. And then it will turn a corner. And so I'm up and down on that. Does this feel a little anti-Jewish or does this not? I'm a hard person to nail down for that. But yeah, that scene had me spinning somersaults.
So Tamar and Fatia leave there and then they go buy their birds. And the seller is talking to Tamar in her native language. He recognized her jewelry and makes him remember his sister. And then he gives them both free doves. Tamar offers to pay, and he won't accept it. And I don't really know how this plays into anything else. I don't know if it's just like hey, there's humanity here. There's recognition of people and kindness and whatever. Maybe there's more to this, but yeah, it's a nice scene.
Yeah, my wife definitely liked it by the time the scene was over. Spoiler alert. She was like, oh, they did that on purpose to pull us in and make us like this merchant. And then, Jesus is going to cleanse the temple. I was struggling again, like an Ethiopian merchant. Is he an Ethiopian Jew? Is he a Gentile? Like, he can be in that space. I suppose he could be selling sacrifices. Would the priestly class and system allow a Gentile to provide I was just, again, more questions that I had there. But I did love the generosity, the humanity, which, again, I like the complexity of, it's not just bad guys and good guys. It's people that have good hearts. It's people that have good reasoning. Here's somebody trying to make it. He couldn't make it back in Ethiopia. He's found a business where he can make it. Like, yep. The world of Jesus would have been that same kind of, everything doesn't fit into nice, clean, neat categories as far as who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. We got to see the humanity of that. So, yeah, I'm with you.
Then we are with Zebedee and John, and they're meeting with Malchus to sell oil. And there's a reference to Ramah's death there. Jairus is the one who recommended them. Zebediah reads out the requirements. John doesn't pass the standard of cleanliness, and Malchus also fails that standard. So Malchus and John are out talking about the politics of the high priest and how Caiaphas is concerned with Jesus, but there aren't any trials during the Passover.
Yeah, I didn't have a whole lot of notes with that. I continue to like how they're portraying that. I mean, not that I don't have questions that I ever write down, but I like how they're portraying that relationship between imperial Rome and the priestly ruling class. Interesting dance.
And I also like just like the whole cleanliness thing. It's like, okay, we're going to read the requirements. Oh, I don't pass. Yep, I don't pass either. Like, it's not a big deal.
Yep.
It's just, it is one way or the other.
Yep.
And yeah, I liked that.
Yep.
So then we're over with Herod meeting with Caiaphas. They're discussing the possibility of killing Lazarus, which comes out of John 12. Caiaphas has received this prophecy that he's talking about. Herod brings up Annas and is influenced by his wife. The film nerd in me, again, has to point out the breaking of the 180 line as they're moving the cameras behind their heads. They really like this move. So, it's fine. It looks cool. But, sometimes they get themselves in trouble. But yeah, Herod regrets killing John because people hate him now. And, there's this conversation about like, well, we're just waiting for Jesus to misspeak and draw the ire of Rome. And Caiaphas is like, well, I can prompt Jesus. I'll make that happen.
Yeah, I really liked this scene and how it portrayed. Well, you have Herod, the Jewish ruler, the quote unquote Jewish ruler. You have Caiaphas saying, you act like you're not one of us, which is like the perfect line for Herod, who was like Jewish, but like not a good one, but also definitely identified as a Jew and tried to follow, at least publicly, Jewish law. I really liked how they portrayed the prophecy that Caiaphas received.
Yeah.
Like, usually as I've been taught that, it's like this passing, he didn't even mean to prophesy. And it was just this passing, like, kind of wink, nudge. But they actually portrayed it as like, he's conscious of this. He's gotten a prophecy, which was just an interesting way to perceive that and to consider it historically. I like some of these nothing out of line and yet new ways of seeing something and going, oh, yeah, wonder what that would have been like if it were more like that than what I had assumed. And I just like how they portray Herod with some sense of Jewish identity, but also not, and what a mess that is. Obviously, his relationship with John.
Yeah, and that is absolutely the power of this show, is just getting us to reconsider how we've assumed these things played out. So yeah, I enjoy that too. I actually really like the portrayal of Herod. I feel like, I don't know that I necessarily had like the clearest picture of him, but everything about him is like, yeah, that feels right. So yeah. So then we're over with Thomas. He's out shopping for food, and then Coffney comes up and confronts him. Thomas kind of runs away after this short conversation sort of thing. And Naomi finds Thomas, but Thomas sees her as Rama. And so he kind of breaks down. He's trying to share his feelings, his guilt, and like is sort of pleading for Rama's belief in Jesus. Like, but ultimately that conversation is kind of cut short. Something happens and Thomas just kind of abruptly leaves.
Yeah, I remember that abrupt. You wanted that. You almost wanted to see where that was going to keep going. And wisely, as a piece of writing, you're pulled away from that.
Yeah, there's no way Coffney's going to have that reconnection at this point. At least not without some further work. But it's like you have hope in Naomi. It's like, oh, she's a little softer. She's a little more. She's not as angry and bitter as Coffney is. And yeah, so there's hope there, but then it's cut short.
Yep, absolutely.
So then Jesus enters the temple courts to a nice anamorphic lens flare.
Yeah, I wondered if you were going to actually add a note. Is Brent going to say something about that?
It's just a beautiful flare. Gotta give credit where credit's due.
I love it.
But we're working our way through Matthew 23 and Luke 13 here.
Interesting way to weave those two passages together, but I liked it. I'm here for it.
There's a comment about how it's supposed to be a place of worship, not like a shortcut. And that comes out of Mark 11:16. I mean, we've got all kinds of stuff mixed in here. I got some Matthew 21, some Luke 19.
Yep.
More Mark 11, maybe even some John 2, which is, that's the big question.
Yep, absolutely.
And then Jesus gets out the whip. Everyone kind of gives him some distance. There's not a lot of running away. It seems like everyone kind of wants to see what's going to happen, but they also don't want to be too close.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of moving around. We get the vendors we saw earlier, plus some others. Shmuel is calling for guards, and Yanni is kind of hesitating about the whole thing, like not sure what to do. Caiaphas and Zebediah come and see what's going on. Atticus is fighting through the crowd. So we're getting everybody coming together at this point. Pilate and Claudia are kind of keeping an eye on things. Andrew fetches Peter and everybody else. There's some fire in the temple. Things are getting knocked over. Animals are kind of running all over the place. The brood of vipers comment comes in. Shmuel is in total shock, of course, for that. But also the disciples are in shock for that. And Jesus looks to Caiaphas, and Judas kind of runs in at this point, and he's like, what have you done? Like,
yeah,
Judas's whole idea of how everything's going to play out has just been completely shattered at this point.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to jump ahead in the next few episodes with the whole Judas, how that will unfold. But I'll just leave that there. But it was at this point where I saw Judas's reaction. I'm like, okay, Judas is popping in here at kind of the historical place where I kind of want him to. I'm going to see how this plays out in the next episodes. Like, I was like, okay, very interesting how they had him in there. I was very skeptical when Jesus starts making the whip at the last episode. I wasn't horribly turned off at the way that they did the cleansing of the temple. It could have gone I was so prepared for like, oh gosh, this is going to be so stupid. And it wasn't. I was like, okay. Like, they worked together a lot of stuff. You've been hearing me say in the last seasons, like, how are they going to work in half of these like passages? And they pulled them together. My one complaint will be the weeping over Jerusalem and where that's placed and the impact that has. But nevertheless, that could have gone real weird and sideways. And I was like, okay, all right. That's how I felt about that. I did think it was interesting that he's confronting the high priest. That the high priest is just kind of like wandering around out there for moments like this. But, especially as a work of the show, as far as storyline and characters and stuff, I was like, okay.
Yeah, and he's got to be somewhere. So why not there?
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine he's usually strolling out the gates where there's so many times where the priestly class in this season is like rubbing shoulders with. And I know that a lot of people would say, okay, but they're corrupt. They don't care about cleanliness laws. But they also do. And there's all this evidence we have that the priestly class, like, they kept the temple rights.
Yeah.
Like, they were very committed to and like, they wouldn't be out rubbing shoulders with like an Ethiopian market person that can make you unclean. Like, but anyway, I'm not complaining. It was fine.
So I don't know if we talked about this in session 3 or not. I assume we must have maybe had some comment on it, but what's the general conversation about 1 versus 2 temple cleansings?
I'm trying to think if I've even heard, somebody has suggested that, but I can't remember if it was a reliable was it a teacher, like a key source, like a scholar that I heard suggest that, or was it somebody else? I definitely have put that together in my own mind as I wonder. I mean, people that listen to the podcast know I'm not real committed to, I have to harmonize every detail. I have to explain, like the apologetics that I was taught would have had to have like explained that. Like they would have made a really big deal that these were two so that the historical timelines work.
Right.
I don't have any problem with there being, I think my personal opinion is there is probably one cleansing. There's, historically speaking, a lot of scholars think it's the cleansing of the temple that actually secures Jesus's crucifixion. Like that's where he ticks off whatever authorities. I don't know if I would necessarily, N.T. Wright doesn't. He has problems with that. I probably have problems with that. I don't think he probably cleanses the temple, at least in a big, loud, violent way twice. There's no way. But I've wondered if John moves it as a literary device. John loves the book of Leviticus and Genesis.
Right.
But does John move it in order to hint at, hey, I wonder if Jesus came looking for mold in the house, found some mold, said we'll be back in 2 weeks, quote unquote, according to Levitical law, and then it hadn't been dealt with, and Jesus judges it.
Yeah.
Which that does feel very N.T. Wrighty to me. Just what I'm reading right now. But yeah, so not a whole lot.
We could have talked about it in session 6 with John, I guess, is probably because there's the conversation about like, oh, he was using his tassels as like a cleansing tool.
Yeah. And I've built that out some. We did talk about it probably in season 3. And then we probably certainly circled back to it for sure in our season 6 conversation about John. And it's part of how I've been like, okay, if you wanted to play with, if you're real committed, because I have a hard time reading the synoptics and not seeing a pretty, I'll put it in quotes, violent, angry, loud overturning of the temple. It seems a little fanciful to me in the synoptics that he's just waving his tassels at people and they're quietly leaving. If I wanted to really hang on to that, if I were committed to that idea, I could see it happening in the early cleansing, in the John rendering. Maybe. It's just one fun way that I kind of wink with a twinkle in my eye and go, well, maybe.
Because they use a feather for like dusting for yeast or whatever. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that in Leviticus or is that a Talmudical thing?
Yep. That'll be a tradition. That'll be halakhic.
Okay.
Not specified in Torah.
All right. Well, yeah, I guess that doesn't necessarily give us any clues then, but
yeah.
Yeah, fun to consider and wrestle with. A lot of text in this, obviously there's just so much text associated with the last week of Jesus. So a huge portion of the dialogue is written for them, which presents its own challenges in making this show. But yeah, pulling all these pieces together. Any other thoughts on how they've brought in different passages in the scene or in this episode generally or anything?
Not necessarily. Like you said, there's a lot of dialogue that's already written for them, and yet they managed to, how you watch other Jesus films and it's just so stunted because everybody's staying so true to the biblical dialogue. And they actually will put a lot of biblical dialogue in there, and yet they just shape it and add just enough context and just enough little flair, and they're not afraid to add just enough that it rolls really well. But yeah, I've generally had the couple comments I've made, but otherwise I really like how they've pulled some of these passages together at these points. Not because necessarily that's where it happened historically. Like there's been a couple times where I'm like, okay, but that happened in the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
That conversation happened over here. Or that conversation, there's been a couple of those times where but how they've designed it within the larger episode and the content, I'm like, oh, I actually really like how that, kind of like how a gospel writer would have. And I'm not saying The Chosen is inspired and gets to do that. I'm just saying,
sure.
Oh, they've rearranged stuff in such a way that I'm like, oh, I like that. I like how that hits. Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, having talked to Dallas and heard from other members of the team, like I have full faith that they are seeking the Lord's wisdom as they arrange it the way that they do.
I think so.
And honestly, it feels like huge credit to the actors maybe a little bit on the directing side too, that it sounds as good as it does because they are generally using the ESV.
Yeah.
And when I read the ESV, I'm like, nobody talks like this. And somehow they make that language work as they perform it. So
yeah, totally.
Kudos to everyone involved in that process, I guess.
Yep. I'm with you.
All right. Well, kind of a short episode for us, Marty, but that covers it.
Oh, is that the end of everything? I guess it is the end. I had like a couple just random overarching. Yeah, it was such a short episode of notes for me.
Yeah.
That at the end, I was like, I made a couple notes and I was just like, I like how they depicted. There's a part in the Gospels where it says the Sadducees and the Herodians. And when you read it, you're like, wait, those are two different groups of people. And so I kind of like was like, oh, they had Caiaphas and Herod sharing a little meal there, talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I had a note about, it appears to me that they have Pilate in the Antonia fortress, which that's a traditional position. It's not the historical one, but it's the traditional one. So I just kind of chuckled at that, and with a little twinkle in my eye that he's probably, I have him in not Caiaphas, in Herod's palace out by what today would have been, I think it probably would have been Joppa Gate. What gate would that have been back then? Today it's Jaffa Gate, but whatever gate that was, he's probably staying in the same place as Pilate. But it feels like they're depicting him in the Antonia fortress. But that would be the traditional assumption.
Yeah, there have been a couple of times in future episodes as well where I've looked at stuff and like, okay, where exactly are they? And I'm looking at their model of Jerusalem and their set of Jerusalem. And it's like, well, you know, the Chosen didn't build that set. They're using somebody else's set. But also, if you're going to build a set like that, you're probably going to think about how it's oriented, but then the landscape. And so just trying to like, you know, figure out like what are they doing where they're interpreting something creatively, and what are they just like, well, this is where we are geographically, physically, and how are we shooting it?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's hard to say, but I feel like they're taking as much care as possible.
I agree. But yeah, kind of a shorter episode, but that'll make for a nice commentary.
All right. Well, folks can find details about our show at BamaDiscipleship.com. We have links to watch The Chosen. I guess if you, I don't know, what are you doing listening to this if you haven't seen any of it, but who knows?
Spoiler alert, indeed.
Yeah. But all that will be on BamaDiscipleship.com in your show notes, in your podcast app, one way or the other. And thank you for joining us on the Bama Podcast. We will talk to you again soon.